Have you ever been in a situation like this? Oh man, I've had this branding for ages, but I think it might be starting to get a bit dated. Time for a rebrand! Graphic design is my passion. Over the years, there have been many rebrands that have attracted heavy criticism from people, primarily on the internet. Some of these have even been considered to be the worst rebrands of all time. Were these rebrands really as bad as people made them out to be? Let's find out. But first, what makes a bad rebrand? Well, as with a lot of things, it's almost entirely subjective. What one person might consider a bad rebrand, someone else might think is actually quite a good one. But how exactly do you judge a rebrand? Surely there's more to it than just the logo looks bad. Yes, there is. In fact, I believe there to be three main areas that a rebrand should be judged on. 1. The quality of the rebrand itself. This is essentially just how good the logo and any accompanying material included in the rebrand is. Naturally, this is all a matter of opinion, as everyone has their own tastes when it comes to graphic design. 2. How well the rebrand fits the brand it's attached to. Out of the three, this is probably the only one that could have any objectivity to it, but at the same time, it is likely that people's opinions could differ on whether or not a rebrand is fitting. 3. How much of an improvement the new branding is compared to the old. This is sort of a combination of the previous 2 points, but in addition to a comparison to the existing brand. Again, this is one that really just comes down to opinions. Some people may prefer the new branding, while some may prefer the old. There's little to no objectivity here. So these are what I believe to be the 3 main points of judgment for a rebrand. Now I would like to look at several rebrands that are often considered to be bad, and critique them using this system. First up is one that I imagine most people have probably forgotten about, but was pretty hated when it was first revealed. The 2008 rebrand of Pepsi. Now I'm sure some of you are probably thinking, what do you mean forgotten? People always bring up the Pepsi design document. That's not really part of the actual rebrand itself, rather the creative process behind it. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to talk about the gravitational pull of Pepsi, or which of the Pepsi globes is getting the best head, but that's not the point of this video. The point is that I don't think this rebrand was very good, but I do think it was an improvement over the previous branding in some ways. For example, the logo. Now let me make one thing clear. Design-wise, I think that the original Pepsi globe is superior to the 2008 version. I mean, that one edit with the 2008 logo looks like a fat guy basically ruined any chance of it being better in my eyes. Besides, the original globe design is a classic that really didn't need to be changed to something which honestly kinda looks like a knockoff. However, if we're talking about the specific Pepsi logo that the 2008 logo replaced, then yeah, I think it was kind of an improvement. The 2006 logo is the definition of over-designed. It's like they took the previous logo, which already went a bit crazy with the bevels and the overall shininess of the logo, and said, oh, what else can we add? To which someone must have replied, let's make it worse. I assume this was to evoke the freshness of drinking an ice-cold Pepsi, but like it just looked stupid. Thankfully, the 2008 rebrand did away with that, along with the weird crystal-looking backgrounds. This, along with each main variation of Pepsi being given virtually the same packaging design, helped to make the brand appear more consistent. Unfortunately, consistent does not always mean good. Why is the logo arranged like this? This just makes the packaging feel empty. I know I said the simplicity of the branding was a good thing, but they could have at least put the logo in the middle of the label. This just looks dumb. Thankfully they did eventually fix this, but it took them 6 years to do so. The absolute worst part of this rebrand, however, was definitely the logo variations for each type of Pepsi. Now, in concept, this is a pretty interesting idea, giving each Pepsi variant something of its own identity, while still keeping the same overall layout so you know that they're all the same brand. However, in practice, it looks stupid. Now, the Pepsi Max logo doesn't look too bad, aside from the blue portion being black for some reason, meaning the logo doesn't stand out as well on the black background. But the Diet Pepsi logo just looks awful. I get what they were going for with the different smiles for each globe, but not only does it look terrible, but it kinda goes against the whole consistency thing I previously mentioned as a positive of this rebrand. All I'm saying is that there's a reason Pepsi replaced these variations with the standard globe after only 2 years. So now it's time to judge this rebrand based on the 3 criteria I mentioned at the start of the video. 1. Is the new branding any good? Not really, but it's not terrible either. They could have done a lot worse. But yeah, it was pretty mediocre overall. 2. Does this rebrand fit Pepsi as a brand? No. Pepsi had consistently been marketed as a bolder and hipper alternative to Coca-Cola, whereas Coke has sleek, somewhat classy branding. Pepsi was all like, "Whoa dude, it's fucking Pepsi! Look how explosive this background is, it's like how Pepsi explodes on your taste buds. Why Pepsi already?" With the 2008 rebrand, they basically just copied Coke's branding strategy of being sleek and minimalistic, just with a far shittier logo. Thankfully, Pepsi's latest rebrand has finally gone back to the bold, over-the-top nature of the brand, even if they did have to essentially bring back an old logo to do it. And finally, was this rebrand an improvement over the previous branding? No, but it wasn't a huge downgrade or anything. I feel like if they just kept an uppercase word mark and maybe didn't position the logo like this on packaging, it could have actually been a decent improvement, but alas, it was not. The next rebrand I want to talk about is one that is much more recent, being the Jaguar rebrand from 2024. Compared to the Pepsi rebrand, I feel like this one was much more negatively received. You see, the Pepsi rebrand, while it was disliked by most, people tended to make fun of it more so than genuinely criticize it. I mean, with a design document like that, it's hard not to laugh at it. But with Jaguar, people absolutely despised this rebrand, to a degree that I personally have never even seen before. The only thing that comes close that I can think of is the recent Cracker Barrel fiasco, but that rebrand wasn't quite as substantial as the Jaguar one. Despite all the negativity I saw surrounding the Jaguar rebrand, I feel like barely any of it was directed towards the actual rebrand itself, rather the announcement video Jaguar released to coincide with it. I saw like a couple people talking about the logo, I myself made fun of it, but mainly I saw people absolutely tearing into this video. But why? What was wrong with the video? Well, after rewatching it, it's pretty obvious what the issue is here. There aren't any cars in it! I mean, come on, if you're announcing a rebrand of a car company, you could at the very least show us what said cars are going to look like now. But instead, we get this sort of perfume ad-inspired thing that feels more like a teaser for the rebrand announcement rather than the actual announcement itself. Of course, none of this matters because the real issue, apparently, isn't any of this. No, the real issue with this rebrand is that Jaguar had gone woke. Yes, the vast majority of the criticism of this rebrand was from blue-check conservatives on Twitter, who were no doubt fuming at the sight of a lowercase font, feminine colours, and people of colour. Oh, the horror! I saw very little genuine criticism of this rebrand. Nobody talks about the logo or anything, just how woke it apparently was, as if that actually means anything. Sorry, I didn't mean to get all political there. How actually was this rebrand? Not very good. First of all, this logo kinda sucks. Sure, the J and R being inverted versions of each other is pretty neat, but not only are the G and U capitalized while every other letter is lowercase, something I don't really like when logos do, but there's no Jaguar here. You know, the thing the company is named after? No, to be fair, one look at Logopedia tells you that Jaguar didn't actually have a Jaguar in its logo until 1982, so it's not really that big of a deal that they removed it. I mean, as long as they keep the Jaguar as an icon, everything should be fine. Oh no. Yeah, so not only are Jaguar removing the Jaguar from their logo, but they're not even keeping it as their main icon. Instead, they're now using this JR circle thing, which looks pretty good, yes, but really? I think this all just leads into the real problem with this rebrand as a whole. It just isn't Jaguar. Like, I understand why all of this happened, as Jaguar hasn't been doing especially well recently, and they've long stated their intentions of becoming an electric-only brand. But was there any need to completely change the identity of one of the most famous car brands in the world? And that's without even mentioning the new car design. Good lord! This isn't Cybertruck levels of ugly, but I don't understand why every new electric car needs to look as angular as possible. It just looks hideous in my opinion. So, the logo is mediocre, the new icon is pretty bland, and the cars are butt ugly. Are there any redeeming aspects of this rebrand? Well, the Jaguar itself was kept as a secondary icon. I mean, it's barely visible on the actual car, but it's there. Yeah, overall, this rebrand is pretty damn bad. Definitely worse than the Pepsi one in my opinion. I'll quickly go over the 3-point test for this rebrand. 1, is the new branding any good? It's not terrible or anything, but it's incredibly generic with really nothing to make it stand out. 2, does this rebrand fit Jaguar as a brand? Do I even really need to answer this question? I mean, it should be pretty obvious from this entire segment what the answer is, but I'll say it anyway. Absolutely not. 3, is this rebrand an improvement over the previous branding? They got rid of the Jaguar from the company named Jaguar. I think that says it all, really. Phew, those were some pretty bad rebrands. However, as bad as they were, the companies that were for at least stuck with them. The next one was reversed pretty much immediately due to the sheer amount of backlash it received. I am of course talking about the Gap rebrand from 2010. I think it's pretty obvious why this one was hated so much. I think we can all agree that the Gap logo is pretty iconic, but at the same time it was looking a bit dated by 2010. I mean, it was introduced in 1988 after all. So the fact that Gap wanted to replace it with something trendier makes a lot of sense. The problem is that the logo looked like this. This has to be one of the most laughably lazy attempts at a logo I've ever seen. Just plain Helvetica text and a tiny blue gradient square in the corner. It just symbolises everything wrong with logo design in that era. Now to be fair, the Helvetica wordmark does actually make sense for Gap, as they did open a pop-up store in London featuring a logo that looks very similar to the 2010 one, minus the blue square. You know, I think that might be the main problem with the logo. The blue square just feels so tacked on, like Gap felt the need to add it out of obligation since their previous logo had one. In my opinion, the logo would have been better without it. Yes, making the logo simpler would have made it better. What an insane concept. There really isn't much more to talk about here since the logo is really all there is to this rebrand. I don't know if the rebrand was reversed so quickly that Gap didn't have time to make any additional materials, or they just didn't bother since they knew people wouldn't like it anyway, but all I can find related to this rebrand is the logo, and the many reports and videos talking about how bad it is. Speaking of which, it's now time to grade the 2010 Gap logo using my 3-point test. 1. Is this logo any good? Not really. 2. Does this logo fit Gap as a brand? I mean, it would've if it wasn't for that damn blue square. I'm sorry, but the positioning of the square combined with the gradient makes Gap look like some kind of accounting firm or something. Like I said, if they just used the word mark on its own like the London pop-up store did, it not only would have looked better, but it would have fit Gap more. Still would have looked a bit too much like American Apparel though. 3. Was this logo an improvement over the previous logo? They reverted back to the previous logo after a week. I think that speaks for itself. Now, I'd like to do something a little bit different. So far, 2 of the 3 rebrands I've talked about have come from American companies, with Jaguar being the only rebrand of a British company featured in this video up to this point. However, the UK has had its fair share of controversial rebrands, with 3 being particularly infamous. Since I'm from the UK, I'd like to take some time to talk about these rebrands to see if these 2 are really as bad as they were initially received. Just note that I won't be using my 3-point system for these, since there isn't as much to talk about here. The first one I'd like to discuss is arguably the least hated of the 3, and I feel like it's pretty much forgotten about now since people have just gotten used to it, and that is the BBC rebrand from 2021. Now this is definitely a case where the bulk of the criticism of the rebrand came from just the logo change, as no one ever really talked about the rest of the rebrand. Which is a shame because this is honestly a really good rebrand. For starters, let's talk about the logo, which as I said was really the only controversial part. It's alright. Obviously with the logo as iconic as the BBC's, there was no way they were going to radically change it or anything, though I suppose you could say the same thing about Pepsi. There's really nothing wrong with a new BBC logo compared to the old one. I remember when this logo was first revealed, people on TV Forum and later TV Live Forum absolutely despised it because the letters were smaller or something. I actually kind of prefer this logo over the old one since it looks a lot cleaner in my opinion, and I feel like the previous logo was starting to look a bit dated. Particularly the font. Gill Sans is an old-ass font. But of course, the logo was only part of this rebrand. The other main part of it were the new idents created for each BBC channel. except BBC Two, who just kept their existing idents with the new logo added on. These new idents are overall pretty damn good. I especially like the new BBC One idents, where we see the same location at different times of day, with a cool lens effect. Though, part of the reason I like them so much is because BBC One's previous idents were so bad. I also like how all of the channels are consistent in terms of their logos now, though I can understand if people prefer them having more unique logos. The biggest issue with this rebrand in my opinion, however, and it is quite a big one, is just how half-arsed the rollout of it has been. This has to be one of the slowest implementations of a rebrand I've ever seen. The fact that it's been 4 years and the previous logo is still being used for things like BBC Films is pretty embarrassing. Granted, most of the rebrand was complete when it launched, but remember those BBC One idents I liked so much? Yet, they weren't even ready when this rebrand first debuted, meaning they instead had to keep using the awful Oneness idents, but with the new logo for another 6 months before the lens idents were introduced. Also, I don't really like the new CBBC logo, it looks far too boring compared to the previous logos. But yeah, overall, this rebrand was pretty damn good. The next UK rebrand I want to talk about is a much more recent one. The most recent in this video, in fact. And one that has definitely seen a lot more negativity than the BBC rebrand. And that is the rebrand of WH Smith's high street stores to TG Jones. Now, I should clarify that this technically isn't a rebrand of one particular company. You see, WH Smith sold all their high street stores as well as their online business to a private equity firm back in June in order to focus on their more profitable travel retail business. As part of this deal, however, the new owners were not given permission to retain the WH Smith name on these stores, so they created the TG Jones brand to replace it. Despite this, many people in the UK didn't actually know this had happened, and just assumed WH Smith had changed his name for seemingly no reason, which caused quite a lot of negativity to arise once the store started being rebranded. Hence why I've decided to talk about it here at all. The main problem people had with this rebrand was the new name itself, TG Jones. Little bit of a mouthful, but it's clearly just named after a person, like how WH Smith was, right? Well, no. There is no TG Jones. The new owners simply made up a name that sounded similar to WH Smith in order to maintain the illusion of it being a family business. Which is dumb. If you're gonna do something like this, at the very least name it after an actual person, or maybe don't publicly say that the name is made up. But honestly, I don't even know why they bothered, because everyone in the UK knows that it's not a family business because it used to be WH Smith and it's now owned by a private equity firm in an acquisition that was all over the news when it happened. There was literally no point in doing this at all. They really should have just come up with a completely different name. But of course, with a new name had to come a new logo. Early trademark filings implied that they were originally intending to use a logo very similar to WH Smith's. A little too similar perhaps. Instead, they ended up going in a slightly different direction. While I'll give them this, they're less likely to be sued for it. This is one of those logos where you just get the feeling it was designed in a rush by an unpaid intern on their lunch break 5 minutes before the deadline. It's just the most basic ass font on a blue background, that's it. Granted, the WH Smith logo was also basically this, so it is consistent, but why does it even need to be consistent in the first place? Wasn't the whole point of this rebrand to distance the new company from WH Smith? Why make this new brand just look like a shitty rip-off? Inevitably, people are just going to be confused as to why these two different retailers both sell the same stuff and are basically the exact same branding. I don't know, man, they fumbled this rebrand so hard, but at the end of the day, it's not like it matters. TG Jones will probably be dead within a year anyway. But now, we get to arguably the most infamous UK company rebrand of all. One that, like the 2010 Gap logo, was reversed very quickly. I am of course referring to the rebrand of Royal Mail to Consignia. Consignia. What the fuck is a consignia? Well, from what I can tell, it's a completely made up word that means absolutely nothing. For context, in 2001, the then government-owned Royal Mail officially became a publicly traded company, though still owned by the government. To reflect this, as well as the fact that the company did more than deliver mail, they chose the name Consignia plc for this new company. A year later, they changed it back. I mean, is it any wonder that people didn't like it? You can't just change the name of a nearly 500-year-old company to a made-up, meaningless word and expect everyone to be okay with it. Not to mention, the logo doesn't exactly scream postal services, does it? If you ignore the rather old-timey sounding name, this logo looks more like a tech company than anything. After this rebrand, the company pretty much immediately saw declining profits. Now, whether or not this actually has anything to do with the rebrand, I'm not sure. But the fact of the matter is, in 2002 the company was rebranded back to Royal Mail and seemingly managed to turn things around considering they still exist now. Interestingly, Royal Mail actually decided to change their name again in 2022 to International Distribution Services, possibly the most functional name ever given to a company. Thankfully, unlike with Consignia, they decided to keep the Royal Mail brand, with IDS being relegated to simply the corporate name of the company, so at least they learned from their mistake. But now, we have the big one. Possibly the most controversial rebrand of all time. One so hated that a large chunk of the population refused to even refer to the company by its new name. It's finally time to talk about the rebrand of Twitter to X. This is the worst rebrand of all time in my opinion. What is there even to say about this? Imagine buying one of the biggest, most popular social media platforms of all time, one with an incredibly iconic brand, and just throw all of it down the toilet, replacing everything that made Twitter unique with the most cold, corporate blandness you've ever seen. I know Elon Musk has some weird obsession with the letter X, but how on earth could he possibly have thought renaming a platform whose name is synonymous with the internet to a single letter was a good idea? Even the logo is literally just the double-stroked X often used in maths that is also just a generic Unicode character. This isn't even mentioning the fact that unique iconic terms such as tweet and retweet were replaced by generic terms like post and repost, further taking away the slight bit of charm that Twitter had. You know how I know that this rebrand failed? The fact that most people still refer to X as Twitter 2 years after the rebrand took place. The fact that news sites still refer to the platform as X, formerly known as Twitter. The fact that Wikipedia has still to this day not changed the title of their article on the platform. Holy shit, is this why they made Wikipedia? All of these things go to show that people are just not willing to accept such a garbage rebrand that throws all the brand equity Twitter once had down the drain. I don't even think there's any point using the 3-point system for this one, but I'm going to anyway. 1. Is it a good rebrand? No. 2. Does it fit the brand? What do you think? 3. Is it an improvement over the previous branding? Is it bollocks? Hasn't stopped me featuring it at the end of each video though. So that's a look at some rebrands that are often considered to be terrible. As we've seen, some of them aren't that bad, just a little different from what people are used to, and some are just... yeah, I'm done talking about that. So, what have we learned today? We are but merely specks of dust in the great Pepsi universe.